Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Jessica McCleese, and this is a webinar with Jay Parker. I'm actually inviting her in right now, so she's going to get that notification and will be joining us any second now. And I also already see something in the chat room saying, will there be a recording available? And yes, there is. In fact, the reason that I'm using the platform that I am and inviting Jay in, hey, there you are, is that we will have a good recording. So there's actually going to be a recording, and we'll have the links for you guys. Both of us will have those on our pages for y'all to check out. Hi, Jay.
Hi, how are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm excited to have you. Guys, for those of you who don't know, Jay and I met in the Christian Marriage Bloggers Association. So this is kind of cool because I think literally this is our first face-to-face, actually.
Yeah, we've traded some communication several times over, but I think this is the first time I've actually gotten to see more than your profile picture.
I know. How fun is this? Guys, isn't the internet amazing the way it connects us like this? So I'll just quickly tell you a little about me, and then I'm going to have Jay do the same, and then we'll just jump right into the content so you guys aren't waiting for long. So my name is Jessica McCleese. I have my doctorate in clinical psychology, but I definitely don't expect you guys to call me doctor. In fact, I prefer you call me Jessica, so please do. I'm a certified sex therapist, and I have a private practice in Norfolk, and I blog at a site called Be Fully Well, and so I'd love for y'all to check that out at some point. Jay, tell us a little about you.
Well, that's just so impressive. I have to follow that. Okay, so a little bit about me. I've been blogging for about 7 years with hotholyhumorous.com, and I write specifically about Christian sex and marriage, and that is kind of born of my own testimony. I have a master's degree in counseling, but when I went and got it, that wasn't like the reason I got it. So there's been some very helpful things that have come from that, but it wasn't like the focus at the time I was doing it. So anyway, if anyone asks me qualifications, I throw that in there because I do have some training. And I have 3 books out. I have a group podcast with 3 other marriage and sex bloggers. And I'm passionate about passion. So I'm excited to be here.
Very cool. You know, that's funny because I mean, I have a doctorate, but that was not something of my own choosing. Well, I didn't get forced into it or anything.
No one chooses. Hey, you know what? I just kind of happened to pull a dissertation out,
Right?
or practicum or whatever.
Absolutely horrible experiences. But I was kind of pushed into it partially because of my own experiences, but because I had other teachers in my life that pushed me in that direction. But you are doing some really exciting stuff, and really the way I see it is you're way ahead of me in the area of getting out that content and constantly posting very good and very real content. So so I read, absolutely, I read the stuff that others are saying. I was on the Facebook Live last week, and you just do a fantastic job. I didn't get to listen to the podcast yet about the penis, but I'm going.
Yeah, the episode is actually called The Male Anatomy. But behind the scenes, we've been calling it the penis episode.
That's I'll have to check it out because it looked like there's some good feedback that I saw from commenters. I just haven't had a chance to listen.
Yeah, one of the best was a man who said, that he thought we did a really good job, and it was like, because we don't own the equipment, we're familiar with it through our husbands, but.
Right. Well, I actually always joke and say I do have a penis. It just belongs to my husband, but so, I gotta have one.
That's great.
So let's jump in. We're talking a little bit about sex and marriage and what it really looks like. And I think we both know there's a lot of misperceptions at times for people, and they believe that sex looks like one thing and probably it isn't correct. And you and I specifically talked about how there can be issues and problems in marriage, and people just kind of don't see that coming or expect that it's normal at all.
Yeah, they don't. I think that we have, there's just a lot of misinformation, but there's also a lot of presumptions that or that it's just going to work out when you get married. And that comes from both sides. There's both the, Christian message that just wait and then you'll figure it out when you get married. And then there's also from the secular side, you see so many examples of a couple comes together, and because they're made for each other, or they love each other so much, it just all kind of happens swimmingly. And so we get this idea that this is just how it's supposed to be. And it's not reality for so many couples when then they get there and they're like, oh my goodness, this is not just so smooth. What do I do?
Yeah. Excuse me. And I work with a lot of people that's exactly what happens. They'll say, but everybody just goes into sex and it works so well. And it's crazy that we think that that's something that we don't have to learn anything about. There is absolutely nothing in life, well, other than breathing, that we do that we don't actually have to learn the steps for. Like even walking, and we have to learn how to do that. And someone holds our hands and walks us along the way. It's the same with speech. Like we don't just know these things automatically, and sex certainly is one of those that we don't just know about because we get married.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think too, because we have that myth kind of hanging out in our heads, it takes us a lot of times it takes us too long to go seek out help. And I know, I'm sure with what you do, I've been asked, oh my gosh, there's somebody who is a Christian sex therapist. Like, I'm like, yes, why wouldn't there be? We want to minister to people in all kinds of ways. And I mean, I think that's cool. But a lot of people, I think, would feel a little nervous about seeking that out. But I would say, if things are if things are a little clunky here and there, that's entirely normal.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think people kind of wonder what like sex therapy even is and what it looks like from a Christian perspective. And I've written about some of that on my blog, so you guys can actually see that on my page. And there's an entire page about what sex therapy is and what it isn't. But when I was going through my training, I actually had somebody, or my husband had someone tell him, rather, while I was going to be gone for weekend training, he was like, I can't believe you're letting your wife do that. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, don't you know what they do at groups like that? Just show you how little people do understand about it, because you, like, for instance, you do a lot of blogging on sex and on intimacy, and you've even given techniques, and I've seen those, but it's not like you're doing those to show someone how to have techniques. It's talk.
Yeah. I get asked this a lot, though, is, this idea of, well, oh my gosh, you write about sex. Isn't that really hard? Like as if I'm writing about my own sex life.
Yeah.
And it's not that. I mean, my feeling is, can you figure out some things we do and don't do from what I write? Yeah, you can. But people don't know exactly what my sex life is like with my husband. That's a private area. But I feel like this is one of the things we need to understand, is it is possible to talk about this. You can go seek out resources and read things like my books, my blog, and the stuff that we've put out. And you can read this kind of stuff and get things from it. And it's not an icky thing. Someone's just advising you. You can also go sit with a sex therapist and talk about these and address these issues. And you're not just spilling out every single moment. You're not giving them play by play of your last lovemaking session.
Exactly.
And we're not doing that back to them either.
Right.
So,
yeah, and that's really important, because I've had people, and they kind of wonder what that, like, what does this mean that you're going to give us homework, and what does this mean that we're going to come so I often tell people, I don't want the play-by-play. Not only am I not going to ask you for that, but I'm actually going to stop you if you try to go there, because that's really not appropriate. So it is appropriate to talk about problems and then how those can get better, but it's not appropriate to entire sexual script of how you and your spouse initiate and what it looks like to reach orgasm. Like, that's not important. And I think that what we're doing as Christians, trying to change that talk, is letting people know that it can, first of all, be holy, and it can be sacred, and we can talk about these things in a way that glorifies God and allows us to have a more intimate connection, which is really what we both aim to do for our audiences.
Yeah. And I think it's important too that we have like different kinds of resources, and we have different people speaking to this, because, and I've often said, like, for instance, if there's a very low libido wife, I can speak to that to an extent, but there's a point where I do feel like, you know what, I could probably send you to somebody who specializes in that, and they're going to do an even better job. So I've often, depending on what the situation is, I've got a couple of podcast partners, Chris of The Forgiven Wife, Bonnie of Oyster Bed 7. They kind of do slightly different things depending on what it is. And so there's that. And, like I said, if somebody needed Christian sex therapy, I could send them to you. I have the role that I play, like you said, is I do give techniques. I also talk about the theology of sex, and that is really where I have focused my resources. And I am, at heart, I'm a writer. So that's really how I like to deliver. I'm kind of when I take those spiritual gifts inventories, teaching is always really high, but I like to teach through writing. So
That's funny because not only are you doing this, you do a podcast, which is obviously audio, and you did the
Yeah.
Facebook Live last week. So who knows? Maybe you're going to be seeing more of the live talking like this. It's kind of fun to do.
Yeah, I'm always, to be frank with you and your audience, I'm always a little worried though that I'm going to like put my foot in my mouth because sometimes I lose my filter.
Hey, people love you for that anyways. Like, trust me on this. People don't mind if you lose your filter. I have a friend that I've done some work with, and she's watching tonight. I can see her in there, but I won't call her out. But she talks about the lack of filter, and it's not a big deal. It's okay. People still like it, and you look more human, which everybody likes. So
Yeah. Yeah.
What I have to watch for, honestly, is the stuff I say that I don't realize what it sounds like until several minutes later when people are joking about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not what I meant.
Well, there's a lot of innuendo and pun in this business.
Yeah,
so, I mean, one of my biggest jokes is when someone says, "So, can you talk a little bit about masturbation?" And I always say, oh, that's a really touchy subject.
That's a pretty funny one. Okay, masturbation joke, and then we're going to get back to content. But I have a colleague who always says that the Bible actually does talk about masturbation, and then you're supposed to say, "Oh yeah, what does it say?" And he's like, and he says, "Never let the right hand know what your left hand is doing."
That's pretty good.
Not really masturbation joke,
no,
but
that's not what that means.
It's interesting though, because we do at times take things out of context in the Bible, and I really think sex has become that way. So we leave it so limited where we don't want to talk about it in church, and we don't want to talk about it in religious functions, because we believe somehow that it's degrading to do so. And then it causes so much issue when people do get married, because they're like, well, where do we turn? Because clearly nobody's having a problem, or people would be talking about this.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I think that a lot of us are wanting to kind of plug into that gap, is that I know when I was growing up, there were 2 or 3 kind of approved resources in this area, but they didn't really say, I mean, they were kind of clinical or dealt at a very spiritual level with things. And there's definitely a role for that, but it didn't kind of get into this practical thing that a lot of people needed. Of, okay, but what do I do with that? What does that look like in my marriage? And I'm having this struggle and this problem. I don't know what to do with this. And so we've kind of started having more resources that address that. But while there was this gap, I think a lot of people would do that thing if they're standing in the grocery store line and they see Cosmo's got 10 great tips to reach orgasm, and you're pre-orgasmic and you don't know how to get there. And so you find yourself reading that, and it doesn't have the value system you have. Or people, they presume that the way it happens in a romance novel or a movie is how it's supposed to happen. And then they feel something's wrong with them because that's kind of where they're getting their lessons, is these, fantasized or secular sources that don't really bring biblical practical tips into the bedroom.
Yeah. And this will be fun. If any of y'all are brave enough, go ahead and answer in the chat box kind of where you learned the most about sex, prior to now, where you have all these great resources online. Where did y'all learn about sex? Because for me, it was the Cosmo magazines. Like I remember I was just a young teenager. I don't even know how old I was. And I would take my little change to the library and I would photocopy our articles from, I know. Crazy, right? Mom and Dad never knew, but they weren't talking about it much. So I would photocopy all these articles and take them home and just pour through them and read them and try to understand what this was all about, because I was incredibly curious, but there wasn't any information out there, which also speaks to why we need to talk to our kids and teens about sex. So they're not articles.
Yeah, my parents were always very, very nervous, it felt like, to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just tough. I think where I learned more, and this tells you about me, I was also curious. I probably actually didn't do a lot of reading. I did read a lot of novels, so I got some stuff from that. Gosh, I remember in college reading Lady Chatterley's Lover. That just confused the whole thing for me. Don't read that. That's not where to go. But I probably got a lot of my information kind of from talking to other people. And I remember I had a lot of guy friends that I would even just ask them stuff like, what's this like for you? And, but even that, I mean, I've got some stuff, but it wasn't kind of, it was other teens. Like, what did we know? I mean,
Right.
and this is one of the things I've said is, when my sons now, when they ask me stuff, and I think they have the notion that I want to say, look, 14-year-old friend who wants to tell you about sex. Okay, maybe they've even had sex like a couple of times. Your mom and dad have had sex hundreds of times. You know what's what? I'm way more expert than they are. But when I was growing up, I just kind of had these conversations with peers. And also, it's interesting you did Cosmo. The 17 magazine column was huge for me.
Yeah.
Which sadly now Teen Vogue has got a sex column that is just, it's just sad to me what we're telling kids. But so we have to have these resources that direct people in the right way, because we don't. And I know a lot of people now who say that they got most of their information from porn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of that. And even if you look at stats and the research that's being done, more and more people are willing to do activities that they actually don't even enjoy in their marital relationship or in their sexual relationship at times, not necessarily married, but they'll do things they don't even enjoy, thinking, well, the spouse or the partner likes it. And I know they like it because I saw it on porn and those people like it. So clearly people like this. And so they'll engage in activities that they and not talk to one another, because their understanding is everybody likes this, so we might as well just do it. So it creates people that are absolutely not connecting. And actually, Dan said that too. Men and women can't talk together. And so it creates these huge problems where men and women aren't connecting and talking about what they actually enjoy. And that's at least as bad within the church community, if not worse. Give you an example, right? So I went to this panel discussion recently where several women were discussing intimacy and relationships. And so people could write in like their anonymous questions and the panel would answer. And you're going to know better than this too, because like you're a marriage blogger. So you hear things. But
yeah, that's going to be fun. You never know what's going to come when you open that piece of paper, right?
And you see sometimes, right, they'll close it and put it down and grab a different one. But the question was about leaving the marriage bed undefiled, and is anything that a Christian wants to do okay in marriage? And so all of the panel are saying, well, yeah, the marriage bed is undefiled. Whatever you want is fine and it's good. But I'm sure you know from questions you've received from readers, and I know from sitting with people, that that's actually not very good advice, because there are still boundaries in our relationship. And just the two of you being Christian doesn't mean that it's, nothing holding you back. You can do whatever you want, because we know that there can actually be a lot of complications and problems when you have that kind of theology.
That's a real misreading of that scripture too, by the way, because it really is talking about the adulterous kinds of stuff in that context. But which then you can say undefiled, you need to keep third parties out and things like that. But that's not really, it doesn't really mean, we want to translate that anything goes. But but the thing is too, then there's this idea that it negates every other command in the Bible about being loving, gentle, kind, and to seeking and not harming the other person and things like that. So I'm like, that one verse doesn't negate everything else that the Bible tells us we're supposed to be to our spouse.
Exactly.
So I understand why people go there. It's a very appealing thing. And I also understand a lot of people want to say the thing of, well, you shouldn't take my freedom that God has given me. And because we do have this feeling, and I understand it too, because there is too long church history had this notion of shutting down so much. I mean, there's been so much stuff about you can't do this, and this, and this, to a point where it was like missionary position, only when you really needed to conceive, and don't enjoy it too much. And so, I understand that the pendulum's kind of swinging the other way with people wanting to go over there. But the reality is we have a lot of freedom in the marriage bed.
Yeah.
And we don't have to bring the tainted stuff in there, because there's still so much in the playground. There are plenty of things to do on this playground.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
lots of square footage. I always tell people there's a ton of square footage in front of you that you guys can enjoy and play with.
Yeah. Most couples that I talk to could probably explore more. A
Right.
few couples, they, probably need to yank it back a little bit.
Probably need to explore what's there. Huh?
Yeah. Every now and then I get those people who write me and describe something that is, it's oftentimes it's something that they saw in porn, and
Yeah.
it really is degrading. It's not how you would. It's pretty clear. I feel like it's one of those things that had you not seen it porn, if you'd had no background and I'd explained to somebody, this is what the act is, they would recognize, oh, that's actually not a good way to treat somebody.
Right. Yeah, I 100%
But
agree.
we've been tainted.
Mm-hmm. We have, and it's interesting because what I find is a lot of times, and I've even had this conversation with other people, like we don't mind viewing sex on TV, and I say we don't mind as this general, as a society or as humans, not like me and you don't mind, but we don't mind, viewing things on TV. We don't mind reading about them. We don't mind listening to music that talks about sex. But my goodness, don't you dare bring that into church and start talking about the marital relationship, because that's taboo.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, because the only way for us to get that good education is to have spiritual leaders in place that are willing to go out there and talk about these things, which is certainly what you and I try to do as well. My hope is that the more of this that people are doing, the more we're going to see it actually in our churches too, and teaching one another.
Yeah, that's true. It's all very true.
So you were talking about, there's a lot of freedom in the marriage relationship, but there's boundaries as well. It makes me think of, I picture the ocean when I think about that. And recently I had an experience, I guess it's been 9, 10, 11 months, something like that. Last summer, I went on a Disney cruise with my brother, and I got to go snorkeling for the first time. Yeah, it was great. And beautiful, gorgeous, clear water. And as I was swimming out there, so it was on a Disney cruise, and Disney has their own little island, and they've actually blocked it off so that it's safe. So you're not actually deep into the ocean. Like they keep, but it's still massive. There's a huge amount of space. And so I was out there for about an hour and a half, and I felt like I was, miles and miles away from the shore. And I look up, and I'm not that far. I can still see the sand from the shore, and I can see out in front of me. I'm not even close to the barrier they've set up. And yet there was this huge expanse that I had enjoyed and played in for an hour, looking at fish and just enjoying my life deeply. And really, that's kind of what the marriage relationship is like too. So there's all this freedom. There's a huge amount of freedom, but there's also boundaries that keep us from getting into dangerous territory or getting into a place where we're going to hurt ourselves or hurt the one we love.
That's a really good analogy for me, because I grew up in a beach town in Corpus Christi, Texas. And so I love the ocean, And but I do think it's kind of our nature is to always kind of want to know, okay, exactly, God, where is the boundary? Because I want to put my toe right up to it. Or there's at least a fair number of people. There are some people that are kind of too fearful, who never seem to want to step in the ocean or go very far because they're worried about what could be in there. Yeah. I was one of the ladies that I recently went to a beach with. She would freak out every time the seaweed would kind of like touch up against her leg, and she'd scream. And it's like, okay, you need to go further out. You need to get further out. But I do know, growing up in the beach town, we would tell people, okay, don't go past the second sandbar. And there was always somebody who wanted to push that. And the thing is, the second sandbar for where I grew up, I mean, it's like a pretty far distance. You're pretty far in. There's like a ton of space. And yet there's always those few individuals who want to go way out there. And I was always like, yeah, out there, that past the second sandbar, that's where they're fishing for sharks. I mean, they're probably not going to bite you, but probably not your best move.
Hey, why risk it, right? I like what Dan is saying here. So he talked a little bit about libido and desire and how it's different for women and for men, and that men don't really understand even the context piece of what women want. So I think maybe you've written on this too, Jay. I can't remember, but writing about like the responsiveness of the sexual desire for women and how women typically are more responsive than the ones that are initiators. And so much does play into it. There's actual research that shows that what's the word for it? The olfactory glands, the smelling,
That's it.
is actually much stronger in women than it is in men. And so women do really delight in scents and smells. And if the spouse maybe isn't smelling incredibly fresh, that's hard for a woman to feel aroused, where men are kind of like, you know what, we're clean enough. It's all good. I can't even tell. And so it is very different, some of those context issues and things like having that environment that feels welcoming and not arousing necessarily, like, because that comes later actually for women, but having that environment that says that I'm safe, the kids are asleep, we're not waking anybody up. That sort of thing really is important for women. And it's hard for women to express a lot of times that the not in the mood part that Dan was talking about. But it does have to do with all these external factors a lot of times for women.
I've wondered if maybe that whole in the mood thing is like kind of really not a good way to think about it for a lot of women anyway. Because if you say, you know, when are you in the mood? Well, maybe not that often, but when could you be in the mood? Could you get in the mood? Yeah, a lot of times a woman could get in the mood, you know, if she gets that opportunity. And and I'll say I've been everything in my marriage. I have been equally matched to my husband's libido. I have been the low drive or really no drive libido person for when my kids were little. I was very, okay, yeah. And I'd enjoy it when it happened, but I didn't have some desire for it. And I've been the high drive. So I kind of wonder now if God, you know, made it where I could experience all of those so I could relate to all of it somewhat. But even for higher libido women, a lot of times it's still, there are all these contextual issues. You know, you can feel it, but you don't really want to fully engage unless these other pieces are kind of in place. And it still is a little responsive. Like you may have that interest and that desire, but it doesn't mean your body immediately kicks into arousal. You still have to do some things to get there. So I think that's one of the things that the difference between men and women oftentimes is men can usually get there by thinking about it, seeing something, you know, I don't know, walking into the bedroom, whatever it is. Depends on the guy, but it is a little more initiating just in terms of their physiology.
Yeah, that's so true. And men and women often misunderstand the sexual desire piece. So we have a sexual desire, or I'm sorry, a sexual response cycle. And for men, the desire and arousal are so closely linked that they pretty much don't see a difference between the two. And so as long as a man isn't having any kind of erectile issues, desire and arousal are like boom, boom. They come so close together, it doesn't seem like two separate things that happen. But for women, they're usually further apart. They don't come together same time like that. Usually, desire comes after arousal. So for many women, they may not be in the mood, but if they make out a little, if they get some caressing, if they touch for a moment, they might notice that, hey, actually now I'm in the mood. That's why some women will be like, even, well, I just kind of want to cuddle and hang on to you and hold you. And then they're like, you know, actually, maybe I want to make out. And then they're like, you know, actually, let's go have sex. This seems fun. Because different for men and women. And so for women, typically they feel aroused or they feel the desire rather after the arousal instead of the way men feel it's so closely linked together.
I think that's true. I think one of the other things that is so confusing for husbands, and I'll say, I'm sorry, I know we're complicated, but God made us this way, so take it up with him. But that is that we that all that is true. And so that can be really important to do all of that. But if he is doing it only to get to the sex, we don't like that. Like, I mean, that's like, it actually shuts it down the other way. I can't explain that very well, but it's like, if a guy will, you know, give his wife a massage just to give her a massage, just enjoying that experience with her, she might well start flipping into, I'm aroused, this is great, let's go. Or making out, or just being close, or this or that. But if it's pretty clear that he's just doing this to check the box and get her in the bedroom, it actually doesn't have that same effect a lot of times for her. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I was trying to think of another way to describe that too while you were talking, like, because you were saying it's hard to put it into words, but you're right. It is. It almost feels then like it's some kind of like quid pro quo relationship if you do that, or it's, I did this. I don't love you really, but I did this because I want you to feel loved. Like it doesn't compute well for women. And so women need that full connection of this really, it really is okay if we're not gonna, be intimate. And what I find is when men will latch onto that and actually tell their wives, hey, I really do just want to be with you. Like, sex is great. I'm always kind of hoping it's on the table, but I'm okay if it's not. Like, if they'll really be honest and say that, a lot of times women fall into that and feel like, okay, actually, he really does want to be with me. It's not that I'm being used. It's not that he, cleaned the house just so I would have sex with him. He really wanted to do something nice for me. And now I feel really close and connected.
Yeah, I think it's that we feel pressure. When we feel pressure, it actually, to do something, it tenses us up, and arousal has a very hard time happening unless we're relaxed. Yeah. We really have got to relax and lean into that. And so if we're not really, if we can't just sort of enjoy the massage time because we're thinking, and this may be our multitasking brains too, because we're not just thinking about this moment, we're thinking about the 5 minutes, the 5 moments to come, like what's after this one and this and this one. And so it would just be really easier for us if we just kind of can focus on the here and now and then get to the next moment, and just relax into that.
Yeah. So it is really, really hard for women to turn off that multitasking brain. It's kind of funny. There's this, if I can find it, I'll have to show you guys. There's this illustration that shows kind of how women think, and it's got probably 40 boxes on it with lines going all over the place. And when men see it, they're like, what is this? And they're not going to go read all the boxes of what they all say, but women look at it and start reading the boxes and they're like, yeah, that's how I feel. And women can have 50 thoughts at once. And I always joke, like, even in really good sex, like, moments, women can still be thinking about all these other things that need to happen and what's going on in their mind. And so it's hard for women to shut that down and just be in the moment, just like you were saying. It's because our brains operate completely different. So men send their thoughts from the back and the front of the brain. That's just how the connections work for men. And women, it goes back and forth this way over and over again. So it's hard to shut that down, but not impossible. So men, if you want your woman, or if you want your wife to really be involved in the relationship, it helps to talk to her more and focus on her and help her to stay focused on you. Point out that she's beautiful, point out what you love about her, tell her you're into her. Like, all those things are going to be helpful to keep her focused on the moment.
I think that's one of the reasons too why those kinds of things can work with her in arousing her and in touching her, is because if you're just touching her to touch her, like if you're giving her a massage and she's just getting joy of the massage, and you're saying to her, okay, all I want you to focus on is how this feels. Just focus on how I'm touching you. And I mean, this can happen in arousal moments too. I just, you can whisper in her ear, you're so beautiful. I just want to touch you. Just focus on how this feels and tell me what you want, and that kind of thing. And give her that permission. It actually can help her to meditate more and more on what's happening. And I talk to a lot of wives about this too. I know it sounds like I'm talking to the guys, but I talk to a lot of wives about this too, is how, if your mind pops over to this, just bring it back, just because it's a training thing. And I don't, now after this length of time, my mind rarely wanders off in whatever direction. It used to do it a lot more often. And yeah, I mean, I know the joke is, are we making shopping lists in our head? I will admit I've had a shopping list pop in my head. But it's been a really long time, because it's something that if you really can train yourself, it becomes your habit to just pay attention to that. Yeah. What's happening.
Yeah, that's so true. Interestingly enough, when men are relaxed, and there's a guy that talks about this. I can't remember his name now, but he's a really funny guy, comedian, Mark Dunger. And so he talks about sex from a kind of comedic view, and he's a Christian as well, but he talks about how men have the nothing box, and so they can like close down their brains and not think at all. And for women, we just don't do that well. And brain scans actually show that if we try to rest and relax too much, that our brains actually fire off even more than they do just in normal times. So having that focus on the actual feelings and sensations is what changes that. So you're not relaxing anymore. You're actually focusing still, but you're fine tuning that focus onto one activity and one thought.
Oh, that's really good. I mean, this is one of the other reasons why I also think that the five senses are so important for many women, is because it gives us something to actually attend to. If you're actually thinking, okay, think about the smell, think about the touch that I'm feeling, think about the taste of his lips, or the whatever else you're experiencing, to think about those things. And you can also, you know, bring some things in, like, you know, get the satin sheets or wear something silky and feel that against your skin, or, you know, light the candles or whatever. Yeah, throw the rose petals on the bed, something, you know, that awakens those senses so you can attend to those things in the moment, and it kind of brings out that sensual side.
Yeah, absolutely. And bonus for that, men, when you bring that stuff in, your wife is going to think you're so incredibly romantic, and that's going to actually be a really great connection point for her too. So not only does it help us, it makes a woman feel very loved and connected.
This is the scene that I want to see. See if they'd let me write the movies. These are the scenes that I want to have, is where, you know, the husband spends, you know, a while getting the room ready. Like, I know that's not very exciting, but it's real. Like, you know, or maybe she comes home and he says, okay, I'm going to put the kids to bed while you go take a bubble bath that I already drew for you, which, I mean, I don't know. It takes some planning to pull that together, but, you know, something like that. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool and real. You know, usually they just show you, they walk in the door, they're just kissing all over each other, they're tearing off their clothes, and you know, of course, I'm doing what I do. I often yell at novels and movies and TV shows now. That's not how it works. Or you just started kissing her. She's not ready yet.
I know. She
needs 15 full minutes of that before. But that kind of stuff, I feel like, you know, that would actually be helpful.
Yeah, it would be. You're right. I want to speak to some of the comments too, because there was some information back here, and I saw you also said that yeah, Dan's right. A lot of wives feel this way. I'm trying to look back at what it was so I don't miss any of that. But somebody mentioned too, like the touch. So Paul would be more interested, more willing to give my wife good touch. Without an expectation of sex, if she would occasionally give the same to me sometimes also. You know, I think sometimes women just need to know that that invitation is out there and that you want that. Because I work with a lot of women that actually don't even realize that their man is hungry for touch, not just sexual touch. And they may make a joke about, well, hey, but if it leads to sex, and they're okay with that, and that's fine to be okay with that. But I think a lot of times wives misconstrue that, and they think, well, if he touches, and I hear wives say this all the time, if he touches me, he wants sex. And so they feel used because of that. And they have a hard time getting the words for it, but they feel like if you're only going to touch me because you want sex, then that's all you see me as good for. And they feel like they can't actually have the connection. But if women can learn that, no, that's a lie that society tells us, actually, because men do want to touch their wives, not just for sex, but I mean, that's why he asks for your hand in marriage. He wants you. He wants to touch you, not just during sex. And so for women to get that understanding of it actually is okay to be touched, and your man wants this, and that society has lied to you, and that doesn't mean it's always a bid for sex. I think a lot of relationships would find some healing in that area, and they'd be more willing to be touching as well. I don't think that everybody has touch as their main love language, but I think the more often we do it, we really do enjoy that. I mean, it releases endorphins and makes you feel more connected.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. So the bonding chemical oxytocin, one of the ways it can be released is in a very long embrace. Like, you know, I think I read 20-second embrace or something like that, which seems like a long time. But if you really think about a 20-second embrace, even just sitting on the couch next to your beloved with your arms around each other, I mean, that makes you feel more connected as a couple. So those kind of moments, but I think it's kind of maybe a cycle, and that is, and actually I've heard this the other way too, when you have a higher libido wife and a lower libido husband, and that he can feel like every time she touches him, she wants sex. But regardless, what can happen there is that, you know, if you have a spouse who feels like they're not having sex often enough, then when they do touch their spouse, there is this desire that it will turn into sex because they haven't had enough sex and they would like to have sex. And then, so then the person on the other end feels like they are being, they're only being touched for sex, and it makes them less willing to engage in sex. And so then the person who started the touch has less sex and is more eager for touch to turn into sex, which turns the person off again. I mean, so you see this, I feel like this is a cycle, and someone needs to break the cycle. So whichever spouse you are in that cycle, you can start doing something different. You can say, okay, I'm going to let him touch me, and doesn't necessarily have to lead to sex.
Right.
And you can touch back. You can start touching them. I mean, that's would be even better. Can you touch them? And then also, if you're the other person, go ahead and touch them when it doesn't necessarily mean sex, and show them, demonstrate that you can touch them and it doesn't have to lead to sex.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, not that I'm not all for that.
That's great what it does, right? I have couples that sometimes will tell me, like the higher drive spouse will say, okay, I'm just letting you know we're taking sex off the table while we're working on our relationship because I don't want you to feel pressured. And so they set this standard. And then by the time I see them again, they're like, yeah, so we had sex. And it's amazing because they're really not going for that. They're in all honesty saying, hey, I want you to know the relationship is safe and I want you for you, not just for what you can do for me. And it absolutely blows the spouse away, and it makes them feel really connected, and it changes their relationship. And they're not being manipulative at all. That's why it works. If it's manipulation, it wouldn't work. But since they're being honest, if I just want to connect with you, they find that it way ups the intimacy, and it makes them feel so much more connected.
That's great. I'm big on using sports analogies with men because I think it works pretty well. So, I mean, this is what I just want to say to the men is, okay, you wouldn't, if you're on the football field, you wouldn't say, I'm not touching the ball unless I can make a touchdown. Every time I touch the ball, I expect to run all the way to the end zone. It's like, no, but you can hold the ball and make some yardage, dude. And sometimes you'll make really good yardage, and sometimes score, but you still get your hands on the ball on your woman. So
I'm saying that because I'm really bad at sports analogies. I just never really so now I have one that I can use. So I'll be taking
take that.
That all the time now. That's funny. Someone else said too, Chris said that noticed when watching Olympics that anytime would get gold or a loss, they always go for a hug from someone.
Aww, that's great.
The power of touch, right? That we want even sometimes from strangers just to have that connection. And it is that oxytocin that makes us feel close. But in sex therapy, part of what we actually do are touching exercises. So like the 20-second embrace that you talked about, that's actually sometimes prescribed for couples. And actually we do a full minute. So for a full minute hug, and sometimes couples are like, that's a long time. I know it is. Like, that's the point, to get you used to touching and having a good amount of touch, and it not meaning that it has to be sexual in nature. And it always feels really awkward for couples that haven't touched in a while, but it actually starts bringing back that touch is okay also. So part of the way, for those of you that were asking about it, to bring touch into the relationship and to make sure that you're each showing the importance of it without it having to be leading to sex, is to intentionally touch one another without it being sexual in nature.
Yeah. Sorry, my husband just walked in, for those who saw me dart my eyes over. So had to get a good look at him. He's pretty cute.
Mine isn't at home right now. He's doing homework, but I texted him to let him know. So if he did walk in, he would know what's going on.
Oh.
Aw, that's sweet.
I just got touched.
Yay for hubby. Is he listening on this in the other room?
No, he just had to come put something down. He just got home from work. But I put the sign on the door that says recording. So
Nice.
Anyway.
So, just as far as other myths, Dan said something about wet for the woman doesn't necessarily mean ready for sex. That's so true. Doesn't even mean arousal. That's true. I've actually had couples that do have that misunderstanding, and the woman will say something about, "Well, I'm not feeling aroused," and the man will be like, "Well, obviously you are because you're wet." Guys, that's actually a hormone thing. So there are times of the month when your wife is going to be wetter, and it just has to do with hormones.
Yeah.
Arousal certainly plays into that. Obviously, yes, it does. And so it doesn't mean that it's only hormones, but it is something to keep in mind that that could be a hormonal thing, not necessarily that she's ready to engage. So good call on that, Dan.
Yeah, doesn't you probably know more about this than I do? Doesn't the swelling in the area, the swelling of the vulva, is more indicative?
Yeah,
of
for sure.
readiness?
Yeah,
Okay.
and a lot of times women can't actually feel that. They don't know that that's happening. You can train your body to where you recognize that more, but a lot of
Well,
times
yeah,
women.
I don't think that you would know it without, touching, but I'm just saying that has to be present as well. Just the lubrication alone would be insufficient. It would have to be the swelling of the vulva is probably more. Anyway, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's true. There are other like the hardening of the nipples. That's a way to know too that arousal is happening. So yeah, there are signs. Of course, like the goosebumps, all that kind of stuff are going to be a little bit more indicative than just moisture in the vagina for sure.
Yeah.
And then Chris asked, can you address more of the difference of the world, how the world views sex and what sex really looks like in the Christian marriage? So Jay, you kind of spoke to this a little while ago, like the novel and the movies. And there's a scene that I like to show when I do talks, but I always have to be careful, because it does get a little risque. But there's a Nicholas Sparks movie, The Notebook. He wrote a book as well. And
yeah, I know. I read the book a long time ago, and can you believe I've never seen the movie?
Well, I'm going to describe this scene to you. First of all, the woman is actually engaged, so they are cheating, which makes it really horrible. But the movie sets it up where it's just beautiful, right? And so everybody loves it and wants them to get together. And so there's this rain pouring, and the girl's like, "Why didn't you write me?" And he's like, "I did write you, and your mom threw away the letters." And it's this huge emotional scene, and she's crying, and he's crying, and he grabs her, runs up the stairs, making out with her. So he's holding her, making out with her, walking up the stairs. Guys, that'll never happen in reality, but that's what happens. Throws her on the bed. In about a 5-minute scene, it goes from in the rain, crying, "Why didn't you care enough to write me letters?" all the way up to she's having this really great orgasm. And you can tell on the screen how great it is for her. And I think that's one of the things where it really is wrong for what sex looks like, because it gives this understanding of it's really great and it just happens. I mean, these two hadn't even kissed before then, or at least not in years. And now all of a sudden he's got her having an orgasm in 5 minutes. When, like you said a moment ago, it takes women typically about 15 minutes of actual foreplay to even be ready to engage in sexual activity.
Yeah. I think this is the thing too, is it's very emotional and physical is really the emphasis out there. And I think there's a lot of emphasis really strictly on the physical stuff and just sort of the savvy of that. And you automatically know how to turn them on. And how about this? You automatically know how your own body works. Like a lot of wives, we don't know how our own bodies work. And I know this is a little tough for husbands to understand somewhat, but we talked about this in that episode we did recently with Male Anatomy, is that, men have had their part, their main event part has been there on show performing for a very long time for them. And everything is much more tucked in. It's much more secret garden for the woman. And so we're not even sure, a lot of women are not even sure how they get turned on. And then it's them when we get there, and because this is what I hear a lot of times, is we expect our husband to somehow know how to turn us on. And then when that doesn't happen, we don't know what to tell him.
Right.
And there, you never see that in the movies where she even says things like, "Oh, wait, okay, can you move over a little bit? Well, okay, you're close, but like, can you just move your fingers? No, not there." Like, and I mean, there's all these adjusting, and you may have to talk to each other. And awkward things can happen. Like all those scenes that you see where the guy picks up the girl and then he like puts her up against the wall and he's holding her and her legs are like wrapped around him and he's against the wall and this and da, da, da. I'm always thinking, okay, one of these times, one of those women has got to fall because because some guy's got to have bad knees or something. That is not happening with every couple.
Right, exactly.
They automatically know how everything works. And it's also just very much this physical, intense pleasure thing. And I'm not sure there's enough just sort of regular engagement with each other. Like how you talk to each other outside of the bedroom can sometimes be the same way you talk in the marriage bed. I mean, it can be hotter, but there can also be times where you're like, oh, hang on, my hair's getting, caught, or,
right.
that's real sex. And I think God wants us to have all of that too. That's a part of the experience.
Yeah. And if you have two people who like to go to the gym and torture themselves, like me and my husband, so that your muscles are sore, we actually make jokes about what days we're allowed to have leg day and what days we have to stay away from it because it'll impact our sexual relationship. So all of that is such a big deal. The other thing that the movies do is they make it look like not only does orgasm come easily, well, the entire sexual relationship comes easily for couples. They also make it look like you said, you don't have to talk about that stuff. But the reality is in the Christian marriage that it should be more than just aiming for an orgasm. Mm-hmm. And in fact, aiming for the orgasm is usually a pretty good way not to find it.
That's true.
Yeah, it's horrible. So, well, okay, but we talked about the woman's brain earlier, right? And so it's all over the place. And so for women, a lot of times in the sexual relationship, they can feel like, okay, yeah, you've got it. No, you don't. I thought that was it. Wait, that's not it. Okay, that was it for a minute, and for some reason it disappeared. And that's how women work. And so they have to be able to have that communication with their husbands, which really should be a value of our Christian relationship. Even being able to talk about whatever's on our heart and our mind, and how to connect with one another. I really believe that God gives us marriage to teach us some of the ways to do that and to connect with one another and sharpen one another, not just theologically speaking, but even in a relationship context, just learning to love one another well.
I think that in the kind of the view of sex out there is technique matters a lot. So you have all these tips and things, which I obviously think technique matters. I've written about it because I do think there are some things you can do to get more pleasure and this and that, and practical tips are good, but that's not the main focus of it all. But there's this idea that perfect performance is what brings the greatest pleasure. And I actually think that it's imperfect performance that brings the greatest intimacy in a Christian marriage. It's that everything's not going to go swimmingly every time. But for one thing, in this context that God has designed it in a marriage, you don't have like a one shot at getting it right. You will, if you're married, we've made love over 1,000 times, easily, because if you do that, 365 days a year, let's say well, I don't know. Let's not do the math. I'm now getting confused. But basically, you could do hundreds of it. You have a lot of times that hopefully you can do this and you can figure out how things work. And it is being sort of our performance being imperfect and us having to kind of adjust to each other that makes for intimacy.
Right.
And provides part of the pleasure too. Part of the pleasure is the physical that you feel, which is really fabulous. It's a lot of fun, but there's also pleasure in bringing your spouse there and experiencing this intimacy and feeling this bonding. And all of that is not about your perfect performance.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect is overrated anyway. Yeah. Perfect is what you see on the movies, but it's not the reality. Like we've talked about, it's not the reality of marriage or the sexual relationship. And the truth is, people change over time, and our bodies change. Have trouble with sickness, or can have problems with, like, I've known of couples that as they age, they have major joint issues in like knee problems, for instance. And so there are certain techniques maybe that they used to use that they just can't do anymore because it hurts their bodies. So this changes over time. And so part of that is being flexible with the way that we approach each other, and being really open and vulnerable in the way that we communicate about what feels good now and what doesn't. And just being willing to kind of grow together. Again, that's part of what we're supposed to be doing as Christians anyways, is learning to grow and grow closer to one another in that experience. But part of that is just being really incredibly vulnerable. And it's hard to do, but it's something that we can't leave out of the sexual relationship for sure. So talking about likes and dislikes.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is a real struggle for wives is perfection in appearance is something that kind of seems to go along with that. Because a lot of times in those scenes, or even when you look at the tips and a lot of stuff, they'll have very beautiful women, and but these are also very beautiful women who have been photoshopped, perfectly lit, made up by a makeup artist. They've gone to their physical trainer. They're on a diet. They're whatever. Their living is made by looking a certain way. And so that is what they spend all their time doing. The rest of us are like living life, and we don't have 4 hours to go to the gym and the makeup artist and whatever. And especially in the movies, these scenes are also choreographed and photographed in a way that they're gonna get your right angle. They're gonna. Whereas I've thought about this before, like when you're actually making love and you're thinking, I know some wife out there knows what I'm talking about. You're thinking, okay, how do I look in this position to him? Like, is my neck looking okay? Like, how's everything kind of working, everything? But this is a lot of, because this is emphasized, is the idea that guys really want this. And also a lot of the porn stuff that's out there that pushes this idea that the beautiful women. And that's really not part of the deal. And it's always great to find out that people having really fabulous sex in Christian marriages are often not they're not necessarily the best looking people in your church. There may be a really, really, really pretty couple in your church that's not enjoying everything they could, and somebody else who's doing great because they are in a relationship such that their partner is incredibly attractive to them.
Right. Yeah, it's that comfort of being who you are and being okay with who you are and letting your spouse love you. And you're right, for women, the self, the body image issues are so huge for women. A lot of women really struggle with that, and that can be part of even the positioning for sex. Like, I've known of women that'll say, well, I don't want to do this position because I know I look fat when I do this, and I don't want to do this position because I've had kids and now everything sags and he can see it from this position but not from this one. And so that's a real difficulty for a lot of, and most men are like, well, I have no idea what you see, because that is not what I see when I look at you.
First of all, that's not where they're looking. And they're looking at other stuff. And then they just don't. I've really, when I've heard from more and more husbands, they are just so into, well, first of all, they're into their wives, but also they're really into the feminine body being different from theirs. And just, she's got these curves I don't have. Her skin is softer. She's got those two things up front that are really cool. Whatever it is, they're into her body. And I think it's good to just recognize that you're not going to look like that woman in the movies. She doesn't look like that having real sex either, by the way. And I suspect that's the same actresses who look fabulous in all the sex scenes and everything. I suspect some of them are married, think about that same thing with their husband too. Oh, I had a kid, and they're thinking about, because that's real. That's kind of what happens. But, you don't see that about each other so much.
Yeah. I have a friend I'd done a podcast with once before, and we were talking about the same subject matter. And she actually mentioned about one of the things that's probably going to happen eventually when you're having sex with your spouse is you're going to pass gas. Somebody's going to. In the movies, but that's real life. Like this is what happens.
Yeah.
People hurt things. Like you said earlier, you might have to move because it's like, okay, you're on my hair. I think my neck's gonna break. We gotta move
Well, and
things.
there are women who worry about what they look like when they're having an orgasm because your face can. I don't know. I don't know how I look, so I'm not going to try to fake it here. You don't need to see that anyway. But you know, it could be look like a. You know, you wonder if you look like the Edward Munch screen painting. You know what I'm talking about? That one. Like, how crazy do you look? And but it's kind of interesting because I think that in those moments, yeah, you know, husbands seem to like that you're just enjoying it. And I think about that too. You know, sometimes I just look at my husband's face and just watch him and think about this is something we're getting to enjoy together, and he is clearly enjoying this. So
yeah. And overall, I had a friend recently married who had actually sent me a message saying about how great just the becoming one was and being married and finally getting, like, I get what this means to become one because I've experienced it now. And really that's something that movies will never be able to show is that experience. That's something that's very internal that a husband and a wife share together where they know this goes beyond just a really fun time. Like this actually is a unifying moment between us, which is really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and Amy just mentioned this over here, and I will say this is almost never represented out there either. In the world's view, and honestly, not very much in the Christian view either, is that there's this idea, like in every sitcom, there's the husband who is trying to get sex. And that's really not the experience of some wives. And I don't know what kind of numbers are out there. When I last looked, the numbers weren't very good. There weren't very good statistics, and people were saying maybe between 15 to 30% of marriages, but we don't really know. There needs to be better research on that.
There does need to be better research, but that's exactly right. So some research shows that it's about a third of women are the ones with, or in a third of marriages, the woman has the higher drive. But it can go all the way to like 40% of marriages or 50% of marriages. And that's what's really sad about the stats. There's such a huge amount of research that's showing different numbers that it's almost impossible to know. But what I do know is it can happen, and it does happen. And it doesn't mean anything's wrong with either one of the spouses. It's just that desire difference exists. And and I do want to be cognizant of time because my husband, I heard he came home and I haven't seen him all day. So I do want to be cognizant of. But that's something that definitely we can do some more work on, talking about high drive wives. I'd certainly be willing to write a blog. Who in our group does that? There's someone else that does a lot of work with high drive wives, right?
I've written a lot on it actually. Okay. And that's one of the things, that's one of the books that I've started working on, is I really want to write a book strictly for high drive wives. Oh, and there is a chapter about that in Hot, Holy, and Humorous, but I'd like to go more in depth with that because I don't think it's covered well. And these women, especially like when you go to and you see the movies and you read the novels and everything, and the guys are constantly wanting to do that, and then you get to your own marriage, and like I said, it's not about the perfection, it's about the imperfection. And you're not going to be, very rarely are there spouses that are on the same exact level libido wise, and if they are, it's usually because they're like passing each other like this in their thing. Oh, we hit there. Oh no, never mind. Because seasons.
Right. And in my work, the only time that I've seen couples have the same level of desire, it could be the passing, like, oh, we're shifting. So it can be that, but typically the only time I see that is when both of them are sex addicts. And so it hasn't been healthy when I've seen it. So most of us can expect that there's going to be those differences at some point, and that they may shift throughout your relationship, or it may just always be a difference that you have to work with. Like one of you may always be the higher spouse or the higher drive spouse. Or you may see the shift and it changes, and then you're both like, well, why did this change happen? Because now we have to relearn how to do life all over again. So you're right. It's incredibly, incredibly rare for people to have the same drive. But I've written on it some, you've written on it some, so let's get like some links together. Maybe that would be helpful, and we can send it out to those of you that were on tonight. So yeah, if you want to point me to some of your favorite links, and I'll point to some as well, and we'll make sure that all of you guys get that. That'll be a start. I know that doesn't really cover it at this point, Amy, but we'll try to do more of that for you and get some good information to you.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, Jay, as a goodbye? I know you have your books. You mentioned those in the podcast. Oh, yeah. How else can
so yeah, basically my website is hotholyhumorous.com, and book information is there too. Just click on books. And then and that's where you find me on all social media. So Twitter, it's Hot Holy Humorous. Facebook, it's the same. Pinterest, it's the same. You just search for that and you'll find me. And I'm also doing the podcast, Sex Chat for Christian Wives. And that website is For Christian Wives, FOR, christianwives.com. We come out with episodes every other Tuesday. So, and we just put out our penis episode, which is about male anatomy. So
I'm gonna go that way.
Anyway,
that'll be fun.
But yeah, sure. and if anybody's here who came through my channels to the webinar, please check out Jessica and for her resources. So at you're at befullywell.com, right?
befullywell.com. That is correct.
I want to make sure that anyone they get that before they leave. So
no, that's exactly right. befullywell.com. And then there's a link there for, I think there's a link for my YouTube. There's a link for my Facebook page for sure there. So yeah, you can get to that. And I also have an anonymous question box on my website that you can enter questions, and then I'll answer them by video. So that's kind of cool. Sometimes people enter something there and they ask me to contact them. It really, truly is anonymous. I cannot contact you if you send something to that. I will have nothing more than an IP address, and I don't know how to contact you with an IP address. So keep that in mind. If you want to contact me, don't do it through that box. Do it through the other means and the other contact places alive on my website. But Jay, it's been such a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Great. It's been great. This is a great way to meet you and enjoy this time.
I know. And thanks everybody else for joining. We're going to close it off tonight so you guys can have the rest of your evening together. You will have a recording. A couple of people have asked that. It'll be with you in about 2 hours after we close off tonight. So you'll get that tonight around 9 o'clock. All right.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.